Welcome to the MAM journals and a new series. I test two types of bikes. I test the bikes that I own, and I'm also very generously lent bikes by a couple of garages, which is very helpful. Of the bikes that I own, and sadly I am significantly better at buying bikes than I am at selling them, so I have ended up with a few. I tend to adopt an approach where we do what I call a first impressions, and I normally do that about 250 odd miles, and then after I've put, I call them 1,000 miles, but they're normally a little bit more than that. I then come back and say, well, this is how I'm living with the bike and what I've found over that time period, which I think is, it's nice to be able to do. Not everybody can do that because they'll only have bikes for a certain period of time. But I think it's useful as to give you feedback as to what it's like when you've lived with the bike for a while. Now, this is my second Z900 RS. I got the first one in February 2018, a Jaffa. I really enjoyed it, and clearly I enjoyed it so much that I actually ordered a new one of these, the SE version. It arrived in January, and we did the first impressions video in March this year. What I'd like to do today is, as I say, expand on my initial thoughts and go through the things that I like about the bike and I'm enjoying about the bike. This particular SE has got, as indeed all SEs has got Ohlin shock on the back, an adjustment, and it's also got Brembo brakes. So it is a little bit different from the standard bike, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time exploring what I've done on that and sharing my experiences and how I've got it, how I like it. And most of the time I'll just be making comments and observations that apply to all of the Z900 RSs. And I think the best way for us to do that is we'll do a general walk around and specification. I won't cover those specifications in full detail because I've covered that in other videos, and they're all in the links in the description box below if you want to see that. And as I say, I'd like to talk about the specifics on the SE specification. I'd like to talk about the aesthetics and finish, obviously an area that applies to all the bikes, and how I'm finding that, and a couple of small issues I want to walk towards too. A number of people talk about throttle issues, and I think I'd like to walk headlong towards it and give you a view on that. Then we'll go for a GoPro ride, and I'll be making specific observations about how the bike's handling in certain types of roads and conditions, and then some general views as well. Slightly unusually, I'll be making my conclusions and concluding remarks while still riding on the GoPro, so that you can enjoy a bit more footage of a bike being actually ridden, as opposed to me just stood in a garage and talking about it. But we will come back very briefly at the end just to make some final concluding comments. I do hope that you enjoy the video. Okay, so let's go through the basic specs. I'm not going to cover the full specification. I've done that in numerous other videos, and I don't want to overly repeat myself. But just as a quick recap, it's a 948cc straight four. It's liquid cooled, produces 109 brake horsepower. Its geometry is what I would describe as fairly neutral. It's not got the sharp brake of a sports bike, nor the long wheelbase of a tourer. So it's that sort of middle of the road bike for ordinary everyday riding, and it does it very well. Now, clearly this particular model with the SE has got the suspension upgrade, and a lot of people are actually very happy with standard suspension. There are a few of us, and I'm one of them. I didn't particularly get on my first bike with the standard rear shock in particular, and I upgraded it to nitrons. I know that a few people who bought this particular bike were particularly interested in having the upgrade option on both the suspension, and what they've done on here, they've put in, obviously it's got an Ohlin shock on the back, an adjustment. It's also got the Brembo brakes, which is attractive to some people, but as I say, it's not a sports bike, so you've got to keep the sort of context of that. But what I will do is just talk you through some of the changes that I've done on the bike after the initial 250 miles, which I found I was quite impressed with it. At running in speeds, it was great, but as I began to progress a little bit more assertively, I did find that it tracked a little bit on the road, and some bumps it wasn't entirely comfortable with. So I thought, with the amount of adjustability you've got on this, I could probably dial that out. And let's talk about how we actually did that. My experience of motorcyclists is they sort of fall into two categories in terms of suspension. Those that say, well, I'm not twiddling with any of that, which I quite understand and respect, and those who are prepared to have a go at changing settings and do so with varying degrees of success or otherwise. Now, I think an important concept to get with suspension and adjusting it is the idea of a base setting. And indeed, Kawasaki tell you what the base settings are for each of the adjustments that you've got from the factory. And indeed, just at another level, every race team will have a base setting for their bike, and they'll change it from circuit to circuit as they go around, but knowing where they start from. So that's quite an important concept to get. And I thought, well, I want to go and see if I can get a different base setting. So Greenham Kawasaki, where I bought the bike, I mean, they're a very good dealership, and they were very helpful, and they run what they call suspension days, and they get somebody in, Mark Hammond, and he has been an Ohlin's service centre, running one for 35 years. So I figured he'd probably know a lot more about Ohlin's than I do, and that might be a good place to go and get a base setting put into the bike, and then I could see where I went from there. So let me show you some of the things that he did on his base setting. Now, what I would say before I sort of go around, just as a health warning, if you haven't done any suspension, I wouldn't suggest you try and do anything as radical as I'm going to talk through on here. You're better off going to an expert to give you the base setting, and then you can twiddle it from that. But if you're already pretty experienced, you know what you're doing, then at least I can give you a clue as to what Mark's recommendations and settings were on the bike. I'm not going to give you the exact measurements, clicks in and out. I don't think that'd be very fair to Mark, because he spent years acquiring the knowledge, and just to sort of reverse engineer it and put it on a video seems a bit unnecessary. But I will give you a clue on each setting as we go through. It was interesting talking to Mark, and he actually explained that the settings that Ohlin's recommended weren't the ones that Kawasaki went with, and they actually are quite a bit different, which was interesting. You can see in this in the manual here, there are pages which tell you exactly what the settings are: front fork settings, rear absorber, spring preload settings, and they show you what the softest is, and indeed what the standard is, and how far you can go on the range. So this here would be the standard, would be Kawasaki's base settings, and Mark, as I say, took a slightly different view. Rear rebound is this mechanism in here, and that, how you set that, you go it's fully seated if you turn it clockwise. Some of them you go clockwise and some of them you go anti-clockwise, but it is in the book. The hardest setting is obviously 0, and the softest is 30. Kawasaki's settings are recommended at 20, and these are clicks, and Mark's view was that it needed to be harder than that, so somewhere between that hardest and the 20 that they set. Now this is the rear preload. It's probably the biggest change that was done on the bike, and this one actually turns counterclockwise. So when you're taking into its lowest settings or hardest settings, so you can adjust it from. The hardest is 26 turns in. The softest is 6. Kawasaki recommend 13, but Mark's recommendation was to go significantly more than that. And so that is probably the biggest adjustment that he did on this bike to improve the handling. And indeed he did. If you're going to start adjusting that, don't be too fierce with it at the end. Don't force it, because it's a hydraulic mechanism, and there's only so far it wants to go. So just a word of caution on that. Now the front, I'll drop it down in a minute, but this one down here is the compression adjustments. The rebound is at the top, and that's again clicks, which you do on that. I don't know if you quite can see them from that angle. Come round as you can see that you can see the screw in there, and you do that. And compression standard setting recommended is 6 clicks, and Ohlin's reduced that. Mark decided he would be in combination with his other changes, that was the only one he actually backed off as opposed to backed on. The preload is obviously set by the larger nut and adjusting effectively the tension on the spring inside the front forks. Kawasaki's recommendation is 3 turns. The hardest you can get to is 15, and again Mark's view was that you needed significantly more loaded on that to get the best out of it. We've already talked about the compression down the other end, so these other small adjustable ones, these are clickers as opposed to turns, and you can see where it tells you soft or hard, and their recommendation is 6 clicks, but again Mark increased that quite a lot. He charged me £40 for the privilege, which I think is remarkable value really, and as we'll touch on when I'm sort of out on the GoPro and riding the bike, I think it significantly improved the bike, and it was £40 well spent. I can now do some little adjustments as I go, because bike's handling changes depending on temperature and use. So if you're riding harder one day than you are another, then you might want, once you know and you're comfortable that your base settings are right, you can actually soften it up or firm it up to suit your own riding style and characteristics. An important thing to say, there's no such thing as a perfect setting for everybody, because we're all different weight, different riding styles. So, you know, I would encourage you to, if you have the confidence to begin to have a go, just be comfortable with it. Make a note of what you've done so that you can remember to get back to base settings if you get lost. But it's actually quite fun once you get into it, and you get over the phobia of thinking, well, I'm going to completely ruin the handling of the bike. You can always go back to base. Okay, so just the sort of final couple of bits on the differential on the SE, because I want it to be a video about the Z900 RS in general, not just this bike. It has got Brembo brakes on, and they are better, but they're not, you know, I didn't actually have any problems. On the road, I don't ride at a speed where, unless an emergency occurs, where I am very heavily braking. And I do on track days. I mean, every track day I do, I'm not a particularly fast rider, but I sort of have a good wobble round and enjoy myself. I'll trigger the ABS quite regularly on that basis, but that's not how I ride on the road. Other thing that is slightly different about this, which I should just bring to your attention, and what I've done to the bike, the seat height, because of the different suspension and the way that they've set it up, it is slightly higher than the standard bike. And I know that some of the more vertically challenged amongst us are attracted to the bike because it has got a good seat height. And what I've done with this is I've actually I bought the low seat. I ran the standard seat on my Jaffa, but I have found I'm just a bit more comfortable with a lower seat on this bike because of the increase in the height. Okay, so let's talk about an area I particularly like, the aesthetics of the bike and the finish. And this obviously applies to all the Z900s RSs, not just this particular bike. I think they're a great tribute to the 1973 Z1, which is what they're designed to do, with this sort of torpedo-like instrument cluster and just the whole lines. To my eye, it's actually not quite as pretty as the Z1. I'm probably sworn in church, for which I apologise. I do really like the bike, but it's a little bit squat. It's a bit if you know the bikes, it's a bit Zephyrish in terms of that look. But in terms of being, what is the better bike between a Z1 and this? I mean, this will win hands down in terms of handling, chassis, engine capability, and even, although I'm not a big fan of them, tyres. Compared to bikes that you bought at that time, it's beautifully finished. And the longer I've had it, I've had one of these, I've had one 6 years. And the more time I sort of have it, the more, and ride them and use them in different weather, I just appreciate how well finished and how nicely done they are, and how easy to clean they are, because some bikes are a career. This one comes up beautifully, and I actually enjoy cleaning it. I know for some people cleaning is a bit of an anathema really, but we're all different. I'm quite happily spend 3 hours cleaning a bike, but 20 minutes weeding and I've lost the will to live. So we are all very different in terms of how we go about and like doing things. But I think it comes up really nicely. I like getting at the pipes and taking time and doing it. And as I say, it's a bike that responds to a bit of care and looking after it. And I think most of us who buy this bike, we are attracted by the looks. Now the SE is particularly blingy to some, and they don't like the sort of gold and the sort of garish, if that's a word, sort of look at it. I personally love it, but I can understand that people don't. I think there's also a bit of, it feels like resentment in some of the forums. I mean, I'm a member of the Z900 RS group, which is a fantastically well-run group, with Simon Freeman and Karen, sort of keeping us that right balance between good-natured joshing and helpful information shared amongst like-minded people. So I think they do a great job on that. But I do sense, as I say, a little bit of frustration really, that people say, well, I want to actually upgrade my suspension, but I don't want all that stuff. And Kawasaki, they only do the upgrades on this particular model, which I can understand people's frustration with that. It's a shame, but it is how it is. One of the issues that comes up quite regularly on the Z900 UK forum is actually snatchiness of throttle. So I thought I'd just walk towards that and discuss it. As I've had to, people say that, oh, it's nothing to do with emissions, they just need to sort it out. I'm sorry, I'm just going to beg to differ with you on that. It is to do with emissions. It is to do with Euro 4 and Euro 5, which is why they come like that from the factory. Now, some people find these throttles more snatchy than others, and there might be some variation in the bikes, and indeed some people, it bothers them more or less. It is possible to cure it. You can go and get the ECU remapped. The ECU's under here, and it's a bit of a dance of the 7 valves to get it out, but once you've got it out, you can send it away and they'll do it, which is called flashing, or you can pop it into a reputable ECU tuner, and they'll do it on a rolling road, and they'll do it individually to your bike. Obviously the prices vary on that, but go to the forum and there's more than enough advice on it. Personally, my Jaffa was a little bit snatchy. I sort of rode round it. This is a little bit, it catches about 2,500 revs is the point at which you can just feel it running rich, lean, and it is a bit irritating. I might actually get this one flashed. I'll think about it, because one of the reasons why people don't do it is, one, it doesn't bother them. Secondly, they're a bit worried about warranty, because it does invalidate the warranty once you start messing about with engine tuning. It doesn't invalidate the total warranty. Your wheels and other bits will still be covered, but it does your engine, which is your main component, will not have a warranty on it if you flushed it. Some people were initially a bit nervous. Well, if you get it tuned, is it going to blow up? And what I would say is there's lots of people have been irritated by the throttles. They have had it remapped, and I don't know of one, and I am in most of the forums, where they've had a mechanical engine problem as a result of that tuning. Obviously pick somebody who knows what they're doing, but one of the forums will tell you how to do it. So if it irritates you, it's definitely fixable. Anyway, that's enough of the garage stuff. Let's go for a ride. I've made over 60 videos now and have gradually established a few routes that help me compare different bikes over different types of road. In this sequence I will be riding over slow bumpy roads, slightly faster but not perfect roads, some town work and a recently raked road, which is always interesting. I will also be riding dual carriageways and finally a typical country ride for me, when I will make some more general observations. This is my bump test road with multiple repairs, damaged edges and a dome surface. It certainly demonstrates how stable or otherwise a bike is and how it copes with rapidly changing surfaces. Obviously the bikes that cope best with this road are those with a lot of suspension travel. And indeed the two bikes that I've ridden this year that have made very easy work of it are my BMW GS and the new Suzuki 800DE. Although I didn't get much of a run of it today, I can tell that the SE was coping with it well. For a road bike, and certainly better than my original Jaffa on standard suspension, it is better on the Ohlins, but you would expect it to be. This is another poor condition road that I occasionally try, and actually a road that my standard Jaffa didn't like very much. I'm clearly taking it easy, but even so, the bike felt stable and planted. It is certainly capable of making much brisker progress along here. This is a faster road, but with a couple of bumps that test the suspension and settings dependent on your speed. Some bikes go light on the brow, and I have had one or two shake their head here, but the suspension on this SE is clearly quick enough to cope. Again, the bike has significantly more in hand than used here. These are public YouTube videos, and it is an increasingly busy road. This long sweeping S-bend near Burford would make a fabulous corner to circuit, but clearly requires more restraint as a public road. I actually like to see how a bike responds to feathering the throttle, as in the real world you will at some point need to do so. My Ducati S4 RS, a bike you need to wear your underpants on the outside of your trousers if you want to ride quickly, has very little tolerance for such niceties. It expects, indeed demands, to be ridden fully loaded, and any easing off will result in it attempting to tie itself in a knot. It is of course more manageable on a circuit where you can keep the suspension taut. On the road, I prefer bikes that remain neutral and stable if you need to ease off, and the SE certainly does that. From memory, my standard RS did as well, although it's less helpful if you added in bumps to the recipe. I find bikes' response to these types of raked roads quite variable, and it's normally a result of either tyres and or suspension. Some bikes struggle to keep their line, and I would describe it as groove hopping, which is unpleasant for less experienced or less confident riders. Although I am not a fan of the OE Dunlops, I prefer the softer Michelins, which do suit the bike very well. The more responsive SE suspension made easy work of this surface. It demonstrates how flexible this setup is. I will actually be replacing the Dunlops soon, and will probably try a set of Metzlers, not because I don't like the Michelins, because I do, but simply because I like to try different combinations. It is hard to have preferences unless you've compared them to others. In town, clearly the bike is easy to ride, and once you've decided whether you want to do your 20 mile an hour in second or third, quite why you need to do 20 mile an hour in a road with so few vehicles and even less pedestrians remains a mystery, but that's perhaps a discussion for another day. In town is also where you're most likely to experience the snatchy throttle, which can be irritating. I think it's important to keep this in context though. I've bought 2 of these bikes, so clearly it's not a big issue for me, and nor is it indeed a big issue for many others. I do find that forums can sometimes distort the impact of such things. Dual carriageway riding is smooth and effortless. Here I am proving that I do know that the bike has 6 gears and the bike is nicely poised throughout. It accelerates well and is completely stable. They are naked bikes, so you do of course get buffeting the faster you go. Some riders have done impressive tours on their bikes, literally thousands of miles at a time, which demonstrates just how versatile these bikes are, although personally we do our longer trips on different bikes. This is probably most like my typical ride on the RS. A nice A road through countryside where I ride at a steady, oblique, brisk pace and certainly not fast. Conscious that this next comment could come across badly if misinterpreted, the RS is not actually a fast bike. 140 miles per hour is of course a high speed, and most will never get to anything like that. There remain many bikes that are significantly faster, both in top speed and in acceleration. Indeed, lucky enough to have a few bikes. My garage tour is actually on YouTube if anybody wants to see what I've got. The Z is actually my 9th fastest bike, but I didn't buy it for that. Agile and responsive is a bike you can ride at sensible-ish speeds and feel fully engaged. I do like to occasionally crack on, but deliberately book a few track days every year to have that sort of fun. I do not pretend to be a fast rider, I am definitely not, but I do still laugh doing 150 miles an hour down the Hanger Straight at Silverstone. For me, the Z is a fantastic bike because it is so easy and comfortable to ride. It can press on a little if asked, it's beautifully finished, and to my eye, stunning to look at. It was one of my favourite bikes in 2018 and remains so today. Oh, well, I hope that you enjoyed that. If you did, you might be kind enough to press like, or if you haven't already, maybe subscribe to the channel. We've actually planning to make 10 more videos this year, so that'll be 2 batches of 5 and when we do them. And you will see this bike again later during one of those 2 series where I'll be comparing it to my Z900RS 1200, another tribute bike that's from Kawasaki, and I think it'll be good fun to do so. Anyway, as always, ride safe, stay well.